This meeting is being recorded. If anybody, I'm going to share screen. If anybody finds a way of enlarging the text on the PDF by Ethan, just give me a chat. I'll see if I can take a look at it. Share screen now. Okay. Well, that didn't work. Hold on. Let's see if it takes it now. There we go. Whoop. One more time. Can everybody see this document that says Meditation, Judaism, and Self-Mastery, 52321? Somebody give me a yes or a thumbs up or something. Somebody
Yes.
say, can you see this document?
Yes.
All right, good, thank you. All right, very good. So today we're going to finish up the essay by Ethan Dorshav, sections 7 and 8, on his monumental research into the nature of the soul. It's mind-blowing stuff. Just as a review, and also we're going to continue talking about best practices in meditation, particularly on dealing with distractions, which everybody is plagued with. Just as a summary, these are the techniques the Jewish meditative techniques we've covered so far. We covered the Amidah, which involves achieving consciousness of God through prayer. We covered Hisbodedut, becoming mindful through internal and external isolation. And we're now in the section on Ruach HaKodesh, otherwise known as Enlightenment, which really means transcending the physical through work on yourself, which we'll get into. Upcoming is the meditation called the Shema. Yes, Rabbi Kaplan does classify that as a meditation, the objective of which is experiencing oneness of God by reciting the Shema. How do you like that? So we're going to pick this up, that section on the Shema, next week, unless I come up with material that'll allow us to take a deep dive into the soul and into Ruach HaKodesh, because there's a whole lot of material on that. I just have to come across stuff and compile it. But if I don't do that in time, we'll start with the Shema, and then at a later point, we'll take some deep dives. And as a matter of fact, we'll be taking deep dives into Hisbodedut later on as well, because I found a good resource for that. Okay, why are we learning Ruach HaKodesh? Because Rabbi Kaplan mentions that it's a Jewish form of meditation. That's the end result of a Jewish form of meditation, through which you develop yourself and you develop personality characteristics, including study, carefulness, diligence, cleanliness, abstention, purity, piety, humility, fear of sin, and holiness. So what's eye-opening about this is that actually the way you live and your focus on your self-development is a meditation. So you could see that with this billion-trillion-dollar industry of the human resource development industry, with all the seminars, all the classes, all the in-service training, to develop personal and professional skills, we have had this for the longest time. And the modern day technologies are simply offshoots of what we did. The wisdom that they're conveying, we have had for eons. Okay, we'll be getting into that. We know who Ethan is, a true Renaissance man and biblical scholar. So just to summarize what we've covered so far, and we've covered a lot. Okay, first of all, Ethan makes the point that the body-soul dichotomy is Greek and it doesn't apply to the biblical view of the soul. We don't have a duality. We have four levels of existence of the soul. And he stresses that this is not spelled out. The Bible doesn't say, well, here are the 4 levels of the soul. So you have to do work. You have to do some study, look behind the scenes, and connect the dots. And the dots are specific words that refer to levels of the soul. And there's 4 of them, which we'll get into. They are earth, water, wind, and fire. And those are ancient, that's ancient thinking. And that was present, that kind of thinking was present in the ancient Israelite kingdom. And we have fire as heaven on top, a circling wind of Ruach, below it the green earth of the Eitzim, the bones, and the basar, like trees and like us. And underneath that, the primal waters of the abyss called Tahom. In part 3, we talked about the biosphere. We talked about how the base level of the soul is the plant sphere. And we are, in that sense, a plant. We meaning people, meaning that and Ethan stresses that the terminology that the Tanakh uses to describe plants and describe people very often is the same terminology, and he gives many examples. And just as an aside, again, this PDF is on the website. If you want to take a deep dive into this essay, it's available to you 24/7. Feel free to read it on the website. Download it, print it out, however you see fit. Okay. Ethan gives a number of examples about how the physical part of humanity is part of the biosphere, and we are essentially in that area plants. Okay. And so, as we've explained, that begs a question. We know from basic science and it's common knowledge that when creatures die, they biodegrade, and their mate, their body decomposes and becomes part of the biosphere. So the question was, well, that's kind of interesting. Does that same kind of recycling take place in the other levels of the soul that aren't integrated with the physical material biosphere? So, and we found out the answer to be yes. So in part 4, for example, we discussed Nephesh, and Ethan Dorshav gave us many examples in Tanakh about how Nephesh relates to water and to life force, to animation, to movement. And Nephesh, we have Nephesh, we have Nephesh through our blood, and Nephesh, that watery part of the soul, is shared by all kinds of creatures, human and non-human, that have this flowing, watery life force going through them. Fascinating. So again, you can see what's happening there is that the idea of soul is not just some kind of particle that pops into a body. It is a system with levels, and we as humans are sharing this level, these different levels of the soul, with different parts of our earthly environment. And our Eitzim and Basar, the plant element, the plant part of the soul's existence, is being shared with the biosphere, and the Nephesh is being shared with the water sphere. So therefore, when you die, the water part of you, the blood, that eventually ends up in the water sphere. We then discussed the next level, which is Ruach, literally wind. And that also is not unique to humans. It is a level of existence shared by humans and other creatures who breathe. And he makes mention of the fact that in the story of the flood, the animals enter the ark 2 by 2 of all flesh, in which is a ruach. Ruach. Why? Because animals that need to breathe can't survive in water. And therefore, they had to be on the ark to live. Okay, those are the only animals endangered by the flood. And he also mentions that Ruach is the social part of things. Ruach accounts for relationships and intersubjective dealings, and is closely tied to emotions. And we talked about how the Tanakh has a Ruach. We just had it with the Sotah, with the Parshat Naso, with the spirit of envy that can't take place. And there's and emotions can travel around a room like the wind. And we mentioned how there is a close connection between breathing and emotion. And if you're very excited, your breathing speeds up. And if you want to control your breathing, if you want to control your emotions, you control your breathing, which we can do. We can't control the autonomic part of us, the part of us, the cellular, and we can't control the autonomic, where the circulation goes throughout our organs, but we can control our breathing. So the element of personal responsibility takes place, and that's why there's a social component, because you have to take responsibility for who you are within the society. Okay. We then went up and talked about Neshema. And again, Ethan doing his due diligence on how Tanakh explains the meaning of words. This is connected to fire. And he gave examples, very interesting examples. The fire of God's word. Out of the midst of fire, God speaks to Moses in the bush. And out of the midst of fire, God delivers his commandments at Sinai. And he quotes the Talmud. The testament God gave Moses is rooted in white fire, engraved from black fire. It is fire, mingled with fire, hewn with fire, given with fire, as it says, and on and on and on. So he then connected the fact that the Shema and the heavenly fire realm is connected very much to words. And as he explains, at the deepest level, the core of the word Neshema is, he suggests, the root shame, name, signifying the ability to name, categorize. And it includes man's capacity for abstract thought. The heavenly speaking soul is therefore the source of our creative ability, moral responsibility, and control over the world. Of Ruach captures the self that we are allotted by God. Then Neshama is the identity that we give to ourselves by utilizing our capacity for thought. I am what I think, type of thing. Okay, so mind-boggling 4 dimensions, and now he's going to tie it together with part 5. So we're going to go to Ethan's document. Okay. Here we go. Ultimately, he says, man is the crown of creation because only man incorporates each of the 4 elements in his being. In the Bible, therefore, every human being mirrors God's cosmos at large. Being a microcosm, And we've heard this quote: the destruction of any person's life is tantamount to destroying a whole world, and the preservation of a single life is tantamount to preserving a whole world. To come full circle, linking the cosmic dominions and the constitution of man, I will conclude, says Ethan, my analysis of the four-element construct with another passage of Ecclesiastes from the section in which Kohelet concluded his essay. Therefore, he forges a direct parallel to the four cosmic elements with which he opened his book, though now focusing on the four corresponding components of man. So he's talking about that King Shlomo HaMelech in Kohelet said the universe is designed with these four basic levels, and so are people, and connected the two. At the moment of his death, says Kohelet, man goes to his eternal home, and Kohelet describes this passing as follows. So Kohelet is using death, the death of a person, as a revelation of these four, of the four levels of people and the four levels of creation and how they're connected. And what he says in Kohelet is, the silver cord snaps and the gold globe is released, and the pitcher breaks at the fountain, and the wheel is released from the bore, and the dust afar returns to the earth as it was, and the wind returns to God who had granted it. And here Nathan explains how he makes the connection to the four levels. The flesh, the body, is of earth, to which it returns in burial. And he says, you can see that from the phrase, and the dust afar returns to the earth as it was. The Nephesh, being of water, is released when the water pitcher, its earthen vessel, is broken, running down the bore, the pit, or the pathway to the watery abyss of the underworld. The wind spirit is Ruach. It has always been of God, and it returns to the collective awareness within God's treasury. Finally, the Neshema of fire, here called Galut, Azahav, the gold globe. In antiquity, gold stood for fire. It shines, signifying the sun. Kohelet thus mirrors the sun globe from his first chapter and anticipates the prophet Zechariah's metaphor, where the same term represented God's highest divine flames, over which the world, that watch over the world with seven eyes. The Neshama becomes free of its worldly link as the silver cord snaps, letting our fiery core rise up to the eternal divine light. So in those four Pesukim, in Ecclesiastes, he's talking about the silver cord snapping and the golden globe, that's the Neshama going up. The pitcher breaking at the fountain, the wheel is released from the bore. The pitcher pouring our Nephesh, the watery essence, down into the abyss. The dust afar returns to the earth. Our basar and eitzim, and the wind returns to God who had granted it. Our Ruach. This is the true transcendent view of the afterlife in heaven in the Hebrew Bible, an existence within the light of pure radiant truth, Olam HaEmet. As Isaiah says, the Lord will be unto you an everlasting light, and as Malachi reiterates, a benedictive sun shall rise for you who fear my name. And as Daniel teaches in the only biblical verse about the world to come, and those who are wise shall shine like the radiance of the firmament, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. What are stars if not distant suns, global globes of fire? So he's basically saying that now he's getting into life after death, so to speak. And so he's basically saying that our material animal, our material plant part of us does integrate with the biosphere, and the water nephesh part of us integrates with the water sphere, and the wind, the ruach part of us integrates with the wind sphere, whatever that is. But the one that remains that's not integrated is the neshama. What happens to the neshama? What does it mean to become a star? So now he's getting poetic. Ultimately, Neshama designates man's personal potential, his language faculty. He already went through that. He says fire and words are so closely associated in Tanakh. Its root word, however, the concept of name or shame, expresses the realization of potential and the accomplishments achieved through that capacity. In other words, the neshama is the means by which we create our own name. This name, the distilled essential idea of who we are, designates an eternal reality within the fire sphere of heaven. There's other material that I'm finding that will really clarify this, but what he's basically saying is that it's the speaking soul that he quoted Ebenezer before, the speaking soul. What is the ultimate goal? What is the ultimate purpose of the speaking capability? He said it's to name yourself, but it's not just like, I'm Billy Bob. It's just, what did you stand for? Who you are is contained in your name. Your shame, your reputation, who you were in a capsule, that's in your neshama. How can we be sure that for the Bible, stars are a manifestation of names? Just 2 verses prior to talking of the eternal stars, Daniel says, "At that time your people shall be delivered, everyone whose name shall be found written in the book." Furthermore, this is the lesson of Psalms. He counts the number of the stars. He calls them by their names. God needs no book in order to remember. Rather, the fiery book of heaven stands for an ideal state of existence. Indeed, this is the same book that, according to Israelite tradition, served as the blueprint for its creation. The revised book, therefore, where the righteous are themselves inscribed in white fire, engraved from black fire, will serve as the basis for what Isaiah calls the new heavens and the new earth in days to come. This is the apparatus of reincarnation, Techiyat HaMetim, for indeed man will not stand again, not until the heavens stir and waken from their sleep. Okay. Very cosmic there, but in essence, he's talking about creation being in progress. And when we say like the book of life, like what are we talking about? So we have this idea that God created the Torah and designed the universe from the Torah. And he's saying that we are contributing to the ongoing story of that creation, and our neshamot, the neshama of each person, becomes part of that story. Because the neshama of each person contains the essence, contains what that person stands for. That person's story, their shame, becomes part of the overall story. Far from the superficial meanings of reputation or prominence, the name a person achieves is not of this world nor limited to it. All of the following verses and many others misread as shallow allegories conveyed all along the Hebrew Bible's afterlife of the neshama. Of the righteous it is written, "Unto them I will give in my house and within my walls a hold and a name better than of sons and of daughters. I will give them an everlasting name which shall not be cut off." Of the evil, the reverse. "The memory of the just is blessed, but the name of the wicked shall perish. You shall destroy their name from under heavens." The most telling example, however, is that of Moses, of whom the Bible says, "Never again has there arisen in Israel a prophet like Moses, whom the Lord had known face to face." On the one hand, we find that the manifestation of this unsurpassed spiritual status is defined as God's knowing his name. "And the Lord said unto Moses, I will do this thing also that you have spoken, for you have found a grace in my sight, and I know you by name." So another indication, obviously God's like, well, Moshe, you're Moshe, right? It's much more than Moshe here. Who he was is what God knows. More pointedly, though, when Moses argues for the salvation of his people, he offers his eternal name as a bargaining chip. But now, if you will forgive their sin, and if not, blot me, I pray thee, out of your book, which you have written. This is the same book that Daniel evokes. So we just talked about how people's Neshema, that has their shame, their reputation, what they stood for, as being part of the story. And Moshe Rabbeinu was basically saying, because he had this highest spiritual level achieved, is like, take my story out of there as a bargaining chip. Finally, our name is to heaven as our seed is to earth. This is proven from the closing verse of Isaiah. For as the new heavens and the new earth, which I will make, shall remain before me, says the Lord, so shall your seed and your name remain. What persists past you, your progeny, and your name. One's name is precisely what will be remembered forever by God and through God, enlightened with one's acquired share of divine wisdom. So you could see why does Rabbi Kaplan emphasize, based on his study, that the way to achieve enlightenment or Ruach HaKodesh is by developing midot. Why? Because that's how people are remembered. Good guy, kind person. What are they going to write on your gravestone? Those qualities are what's remembered. So his whole thrust, when Rabbi Kaplan talks about personal development as the path to enlightenment, he's basically mindful of the fact that the person you made yourself is encapsulated in your neshama, and that becomes part of the creation story. That's how you're remembered, by the person that you made yourself. That's who you became. That's your reputation. So in conclusion, he says this. At first glance, one may question the value of connecting the idea of man to an archaic picture of the cosmos. We have come to know the heavens as an expanding emptiness rather than a translucent fire dome. The idea of the Shema as heavenly light, therefore, loses for us its concreteness. This was not the case in antiquity. No doubt Israelite sages held the hierarchical picture as more scientific than metaphoric. The elements of man were, to them, tangible insertions from the multiple rings of reality. Just as the body was shaped from soil, the neshama was fashioned of stardust taken from the host of angelic chariots. So he's making the point that this wasn't news to our forebears. This is how they pictured people. So you can imagine that from a healing point of view, if somebody was sick, they'd be looking at his soul and the essence of, like, how is your body interacting with its environment? How is your circulation interacting with its environment? How is your breathing? How is your Ruach interacting with its environment? And what kind of person are you? How is the state of your neshama? Nonetheless, the Bible transcends the limits of antiquated perception. It teaches how to distinguish within each one of us the material, the dynamic, the relational, and the ideal. And these distinctions add up to a worldview with far-reaching philosophic consequences. In doing so, it allows the ideal I to shed not only the physical body and immortal life, but also the constituent of social relativity. In the kingdom of light, we transcend all characteristics of gender, status, tongue, or nationality. So you can imagine the ramifications for this for social identity, and you could see how when like the founders of the United States say things like all men are created equal, and when they talk about regardless of race, color, or creed, this is a foundation of that. You don't go by the race, color, or creed. Those are just constructs. Those are just things that in the essence don't define a person. In turn, the other three components of our being attain their own continuity: the body and progeny, the Nephesh in universal life energy, and the Ruach in the collective. Modern cosmology, therefore, does not debase the Israelite four-tier paradigm any more than dissecting a heart obliterates the idea of love. So we have an impact that goes far beyond our person here. In addition, deciphering biblical metaphysics allows us to correct not only the dualistic prejudice regarding the Hebrew Bible, again, the body and soul idea is not biblical, but also our entire understanding of the canon, the Hebrew canon. The process forces us to reconsider the common notion that it is a book of stories, one with moral lessons, but without a philosophical backbone. As we can now see, this is hardly the case. Indeed, the discovery of the elemental structure may provide an incentive to relate to the Hebrew canon as a whole rather than as fragments. He's saying the whole of Tanakh is telling us how we're created and how we exist and what we should do with our life. The early appearance of the elemental theory, meanwhile, defies the conventional view regarding Greek influence on the Bible, especially in the wisdom writings. Ideas that push the dating of Ecclesiastes, for instance, as late as the 3rd century, blah, blah, blah. There is now more room to view late biblical ideas as drawing upon earlier Israelite thought, not Greek. At the same time, we have reason to connect teachings by medieval Jewish philosophers to their own traditional roots. When Maimonides or Sa'ad Gaon mentions the elements, it is not only because he is projecting an Aristotle prejudice onto the Bible. So yeah, so when the Rambam and Sa'ad Gaon talk about metaphysics, even though they were fluent with what the Greeks thought, they're talking about biblical metaphysics and correlating them to the Greeks. So Ethan is kind of taking a shot here saying, people mistakenly think that the great Jewish philosophers were so influenced by the Greeks that they adopted their metaphysical philosophy, and Ethan's saying, no, they had it from us and they integrated it with whatever truth they found elsewhere. Last but not least, we now understand that the biblical aversion to picturing souls is deliberate. Israelite thought believed in a heavenly afterlife, but by definition, not one that can be pictured any more than pure wisdom can be given shape. For the Bible, then, even imagining souls with ghost-like bodily forms constitutes a philosophical aberration. Instead, the Bible teaches of a multi-layered afterlife intertwined with the entire scope of existence. Its anthropocentric concept of the cosmos lends the Bible a powerful humanistic angle, and at the same time highlights deep ecological and spiritual affinities, between humankind and the rest of creation. So he's basically saying that we don't picture souls because that Neshema, at the ultimately that Neshema which persists after your body and your Nephesh and your Ruach have been integrated in their environments, that can't be described. That words don't do it justice. It has words, but it exists in this level where you can't use words to describe it. That's like this Zen thing. Above all, the notion of being created in the image of God may now acquire dramatic new meaning. Furthering this idea, I wish to conclude with an implication of these discoveries for the meaning of Kaddish, the ancient but mysterious Jewish prayer of mourning. As an orphan stands over a parent's grave, breaking his teeth on the Aramaic, he in fact utters no words at all in honor of the deceased. The Kaddish does not petition the deceased to intervene on behalf of those alive, or declare faith in God's judgment for the righteous, or seek to justify God's sovereignty over man's life, or even allude to death. Most pointedly, and with intriguing similarity to our analysis of the biblical narrative, the prayer does not even mention souls, or the afterlife, or any Eden-like world of the dead. Instead, for a millennium, adherents of the Israelite tradition repeat a phrase that is intended to offer ultimate solace and lend meaning to death. Yitgadal v'yitkadash Shema Rabbah, magnified and sanctified be what? God's great name. Why choose these words for this moment? Why are we saying Kaddish in honor and when somebody dies? The biblical verse that stands behind the opening phrase of Kaddish teaches that the magnitude and sanctity of God's name are in fact not yet possible. They refer only to the fulfilled state of the world. Only when creation will be fully redeemed at the end of days, says God, I will magnify myself and sanctify myself. Zechariah completes this message. On that day, the Lord will be one and his name one. This is why the Kaddish is in the future tense, applicable when his kingdom shall reign. The meaning, according to rabbinic sources, is that until the days to come, the name of God is somehow incomplete. We pray, therefore, for its renewed completeness. The hymn, in effect, mourns for God rather than for the dead. So he's heading into this territory of explaining Kaddish by saying, we are praying for the wholeness of God's name. All right, so now people that are thinking out there are going to be thinking, wait a minute. How, God having a name, God doesn't have pieces. It's not like God and then God's name. Okay, so where are we heading with this? Aha. Only when we appreciate that the essence of man's Neshema lies precisely in the idea of an eternal name can the death of our beloved, or rather his or her posthumous existence, contribute to the completion of God's name. What makes the Kaddish so poignant is that a man's name is carved out of the divine throne, and when it itself reaches a state of fulfillment, it reunites with its source, the great name of God. By doing so, it adds a unique spark towards the latter's ultimate completeness. Man's acquired name then completes God's name. In praying for the completion and enlargement of God's name, the mourner relates the name of the deceased, the realized essence of his or her neshama, to the divine as a purified identity. In Jewish philosophy, this is true and eternal salvation. Big stuff, but what he's saying in a real simple form is that when all our neshamot can collectively come together and form the name of God, whatever that is. And if you believe that our neshama has our essence, then you would have to say that our collective neshamot collectively would represent God's essence, whatever that is. And this is far beyond what I know. But the point of it, and he's cleverly using the Kaddish as a stepping point to make this point. He's basically saying, we are hoping that the neshama of the deceased eventually makes its contribution and joins us and combines with the other neshamot of other people who died. And isn't it too, and that will eventually create God's name, whatever that means. And is it, we're not there yet. So this whole, he's using this metaphysical philosophy to basically bemoan the fact that the good days haven't come yet because God's name is incomplete. And the fact that somebody died and their neshama is ascending to heaven with their essence, maybe we're one step closer, hooray, but we're not there yet. Now you know why we need to have some follow-ups on this stuff, because this is tough stuff. Okay. That was an earful. So we're going to save the lesson on the best practices for dealing with distractions for next week. And we're going to go right into meditation. Okay. I'll stop the recording.